Hey everyone, thank you for being patient with us there. Sometimes doing hybrid events is a bit difficult. But yes, welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live across Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So whether you're in Bristol or far away, you can join the conversation. This week, we're really excited to be taking part of the wonderful Festival of Nature, which is a beautiful and free celebration of nature, of the natural world, taking place from the 10th to the 18th of June. So this is the first day. My name is Zoe. I'm the environmental emergencies researcher here at the studio. I'm a white woman with blonde hair, wearing a kind of white vest and a blue shirt and a Watershed lanyard. So these lunchtime talks are part of our Open Studio Friday offer. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the studio and offer you the chance to spend time in the space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. So welcome. So these talks cover everything from innovative research in fields of creativity and technology to projects in progress, which are in need of feedback, questions, and curious minds. And a warm welcome to those who are new to the studio. If you're new to the studio, can you give me a wave? Ah, look, so many new people. We love it. Welcome, everyone. And so for those of you who've been here before, why not take a moment to share the link to the talk on your socials? And let's get even more people joining us live. So what is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology with everything from comedy to coding to product development and performance art. It's a partnership between Watershed, the University of West England, and the University of Bristol. We're a home for embryonic ideas, research and development, and the building of new companies. And we're a meeting place for both creative and commercial industries. We offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities to our residents as part of our spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. We're a space for people to come and take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration with others. A quick bit of housekeeping. So do feel free to move around, make a cup of tea. You can grab a glass of water over there. I know it's hot today. We have a quiet space just literally over there. So if you need to take a break at any point, please feel free to get up and use the space. Fire exits are at either end of the studio, and one of the studio team will direct you to them should we need to use them. Accessible toilets and baby change can be found in the corridor next to the kitchen. A captioned and recorded version of the talk will also be available here after the talk is finished. If you're watching online now and you'd like subtitles, head over to our Facebook page for the live stream. Just search Pervasive Media Studio. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk, so for those of you watching online, please pop your questions in the YouTube chat or tweet us at PM Studio UK, and if you're in the building, just raise your hand. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, and you can check out more about Festive Nature at Festive Nature on Twitter. So now we've done all of that, thank you for your patience. I'm super excited to introduce today's talk, Toby Smith, who's a photographer and program lead at Climate Visuals, and will be talking with us about how inclusive imagery of the natural environment is key to building a diverse climate movement. So Toby, if you're there, take it away.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Zoe, for the introduction. I can't actually see you, so Jack, if you can get that camera feed going, that would be great. I'm assuming you guys are all there and can hear me. Firstly, an apology. I live 45 minutes up the road in Stroud, Gloucestershire, but about 18 foot below me, watching a Pixar movie, is my 5-year-old son with chickenpox. So I hope he doesn't run in and disturb us. But yeah, sorry not to be with you there in person, but I'll try and make this as interactive as possible, especially in the last half. So I think we're going to start with framing this talk with quite a problem, in my opinion, and something that I hope the team and the report and some of this webinar and what we're going to present digs into a little bit, and I'd love to invite your views on it as well. This is a fact-based statement from some of our research, in that the available library of images in circulation and relating to English and British nature, and I also think globally, inaccurately represents the diversity of both natural places in a changing climate, the communities engaging with them, and the images currently in circulation are very unlikely to engage well beyond those people already interested in nature. This is a failure both in terms of grasping the opportunities to engage people on relevant issues such as climate change or biodiversity loss, and to convey an equitable or acceptable concept of inclusivity. So I'm going to dig into this a little bit deeper. This is a webinar format I've presented only once before, and I'm lacking some of the incredible team that did the research and the insights. They're not here with me today. But the original report and research was commissioned by Natural England, the UK's government body, and they've already taken the results of this into a new image library to support improving the diversity of who and where people access different definitions of nature in the UK. The reason why I'm from an organisation called Climate Outreach based in Oxford in the UK. We're a group of communication professionals and social scientists who are trying to improve and make more nuanced and successful and more diverse the language and communications around climate change. Specifically, my role is heading up the Climate Visuals project, which looks specifically at the imagery around climate change and trying to make sure that it's more impactful, accessible and diverse. I won't be covering that at all in this report, but the reason why I wanted to bring it in here is if you are in climate change communications, especially in the visual, do come and find us at climatevisuals.org. The program's been running for about 5 years, and we specialize in both the evidence and practical background of photography to make it more impactful. And it was our prior work that led Natural England to commission our team to produce some of the work and insights that we gathered in a participatory nature that we're going to show you. But before I dive in, there are 2 guest speakers that I had in the original format of this webinar that I've managed to extract from that recording, or rather Jack has, that I would like to bring in to diversify my own opinion on this. The first keynote speaker is Judy Linguang. Judy's a painter, poet, environmentalist, and an expert advisor on multicultural environmental participation, probably well known to some of you in the room. She's best known as the honorary president of the Black Environment Network. She was someone that featured in our report and is someone who I've taken great counsel from and have a lot of gratitude for in helping me do my own work. So Jack, could you, I'll mute myself. If you can cue up the first video segment, that would be great.
I welcome the report. It is exciting to see the recognition of the necessity for visuals that move towards consciously incorporating the presence of people, representing how the diverse range of people connect with, enjoy, and benefit from nature, moving us away from the image of an outdoors for white people with its restricted range of activities. Nature visuals aim to encompass both the rural and urban settings. I will always remember the impact of a trip for a small group of young people living in Birmingham. They were typical of many people trapped within the barren environments of inner cities. They had never seen wild open spaces, mountains or waterfalls, or walked within woodlands or forests. The young worker said to us, after coming home, they just went on and on about how they longed for more green where they lived. The youth organization did various projects, including planting trees in small areas of land identified with the help of supportive local environmental organizations. This was the story that struck me. Before I went into the countryside, the tree in the pavement was just a tree in the pavement. But after we came back, every time I see a tree in the pavement, it brings me the feel and the smell of the forest walk, and the endless green of the countryside. It is obvious that the experience of nature at large is fundamentally transformative and puts all contact with nature into perspective. The process of engagement can be summed up in 2 short phrases. We love what we enjoy, and we protect what we love. It is obvious that access kickstarts this process of enjoyment, leading to the love of nature and the motivation to protect it. This report sets a standard for a more inclusive, contemporary, people-centered visual language. telling a fuller story of people and nature will ultimately release a vast missing contribution from the social groups that are excluded. I look forward to more images. I would like to see nature visuals showing a great range of activities. Perhaps a Filipino family group sitting quietly under a tree, drawing with crayons in their local park. A Latin American group sprinkling water to the 4 directions as an offering before going on a trail. Or even video clips too of Asian groups discussing how the qualities of reeds are different from those in their country of heritage, comparing basket weaving techniques in a city fringe wetland. Or a Black gospel group singing in praise of creation as they walk and enjoy nature in the countryside. Seeing people like ourselves participating in the full range of activities in the natural environment builds our sense of belonging, of being full citizens. This report is poised to move us forward with the clarity and simplicity of 6 principles. Within these principles and the accompanying practical recommendations, we hear the voices that represents the needs, the wishes, and the aspirations of target groups. Use images to tell positive, identifiable stories. Create authentic representation, not tokenism. Depict diverse activities in diverse landscapes. Connect people to the wonderful diversity of natural places. Include more real people in images. Diversify who is behind the camera and the message. Importantly, this report gives weight to the need for action. It is something to wave at other policymakers, especially those at the organizational level where implementation needs to take place to transform the inclusion space. The content of the report is not new. It is information that has come through from societal groups at the edges into the center. But significantly, it is an indicator that the theme of nature visuals has arrived at being given the status that it deserves. It is a marker of progress, a marker of shared understanding that has gathered force over time. A benchmark is being set by this report. Even as there is a forthcoming challenge for implementation, we must not lose sight of the feel-good factor. This is a moment for celebration. We look forward to the promotion of the report, the resourcing of actions, and the monitoring of its impact. At the same time, let us maintain a wide vision and be mindful of the shifting socio-cultural political themes that constantly reframe how we see the context of providing for target groups and redefine our purpose and responsibilities. One example is the growing awareness that the people we call disabled are simply who they are. It is us who disable them and stop them from fulfilling their full potential in life if we do not take up the social responsibility to attend to their personal characteristics. Another example, COP26 has focused our minds on the fact that addressing the existential threat of climate change is about worldwide collaboration. This marks a shift which moves working with ethnic minorities center stage. An environmental sector that can work with confidence with the world of diversity within Britain will gain an ease with dealing with different cultures and acquire the intercultural skills needed for international collaboration. Challenges of identity, belonging, attention to specific needs, and provision of a level playing field of opportunity are issues for all poor, excluded, and disadvantaged groups, in particular for those with named protected characteristics. This report shows clear actions that help to move them away from exclusion because of who they are or what they look or sound like. This report helps us to work towards making the map real for so many that are isolated and excluded. Who we are and what we can achieve depends on how we see ourselves against the enormous pressure of how others see us. Nature Visuals is moving us in the right direction. It is a joy to see the launch of this significant report. Let us look forward to meeting the challenges positively together, including the proposal of a collaborative and evidence-based image library with input from the community to catalyze new networks and capacity building, as well as developing impactful visual content. This is a fine beginning to a journey to prompt new and continued action in the inclusion space, supported by research, image, production, and curation. Thank you for listening.
Judy. Excellent. I'm going to assume that you guys can hear me again. What Judy's referencing there, she puts the bigger picture so well, and has inspired me on my own research for the last couple of years. The report that she referenced that this webinar is based on includes those 6 principles, which is going to be the meat of the talk that I'm going to run you through. You can also find the full report at climatevisual.org, which includes some of the content I'm going to share, but also lots of good practical details around how we can improve the photography. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of virtually also introduce a short video segment from Joanna Coates. Joanna's an amazing young photographer based up in Yorkshire, a photographic storyteller, an artist who works in communities as well. So Jack, if you could cue video 2, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'm disabled and I'm a woman. I'm also from the rural northeast of England and based there as well, which makes me an unlikely speaker. Why does it matter? And why does it matter whose stories get told with images? In the creative industries in the UK, there are less than 12% of working class visual artists, including photographers. If we look at other statistics, it's just as shocking. In terms of BIPOC, there's less than 4.8% of visual arts, including photographers. And if we kind of look at intersectionality, the numbers are even lesser. So if we were to look at a woman, an LGBTQ plus person, a disabled person, the numbers go down and down. So obviously they're really low percentages, and it gives you little hope of what can be done, but there is hope. Would you be able to put the intro slide on? So what this is the majority of visuals we see are from white, middle class to upper class, and that's the gaze that we kind of see more often than not. It's well known stories are stronger when they're told through the eyes of experience. My work often takes place where I live. Often regional stories are told by a more London-centric voice. My home's between the Northern Pennines, an area of outstanding natural beauty, and the Yorkshire Dales National Park, a beautiful area but one with problems, low income poverty, lack of housing and social exclusion. Many stories of this area are pictorial beauty or rural idylls. I'm interested in telling authentic stories about real people. What I've noticed is lacking is diversity of voices of those who are making images and telling stories. We need commissioners as well as photographers who are diverse. Those who are disabled, I want to hear their story. Those who are BIPOC, I want to hear their stories. Those who are working class, I want to hear their stories. For me, these are the voices that are missing. The work I do is often commercial and editorial, but there is a big important part of that is community driven. This often results in using spaces that like public libraries in urban spaces, a green urban space, it could be a visitor centre in a national park, spaces that will bring people together to explore. And the reason for this is to explore these spaces from new perspectives. In this way, we can bring groups together and share these spaces. These are spaces for everyone. The project I'm going to talk about today talks about a place in Upper Teesdale. This is a beautiful place, but it's also a place that has issues around poverty and, again, social exclusion. It's an area where a lot of the young people from there have to leave, and my work was around working with these young people who are from low income backgrounds, whose stories are not often told in terms of the rural and visuals around the rural. So when thinking about a future for this place and climate visuals, it was really important that we had authentic images. So what do we need? We need to look at the area. So we need to look regionally, again, not just London-centric or look at areas kind of grouped together. We need to look specifically at those areas. And we need kind of communication with the local people who are from there, but also with the people who visit there, and making that those areas are accessible and thinking about what images tell that story. So in the work I'm doing, the young people were taught by me to tell their own stories through photography. With this type of work, the photographer often has an established practice, and they will often have experience with groups and understand the ethics of working with marginalised groups, as well as having all the reference checks. But it's really important, this type of work gives kind of collaborative images that tell a really important story. The group asked for other groups to engage with. That was one of the things they said they wanted. And in this way, you can bring urban and rural groups together to create a wealth of images. They share skills together, and the people that I worked with were from 8 years old to 18 years old. The work is going to be exhibited in an outdoor installation in Bowley's Visitor Centre. What this will do is it allow visitors and people from the area to explore a natural place in a new way. There's going to be a trail that invites exploration. The images all often look at the natural beauty of the place and what the young people identify as important. And a lot of that is around climate visuals and conservation. But they also talk about hard issues like isolation, lack of housing, and feeling socially excluded. Both of these are important to me, and you can do this in a positive way. What this does is it creates a deeper connection, not only between people, but place as well. So when we think about who is behind the camera, we need to be creative. It could be all different types of people. It could be a collaborative project like this. Obviously, I work as a photographer myself, but I think we really need to see a more diverse wealth of people behind cameras. As adults, we often explore these issues at a later age. However, I think it's really important that climate visual literacy is explored from a young age so that we can really begin to think about diversity. With each project in place, we need to think about who we are missing and how can we work to include them with the visuals and the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Cool, and thanks everybody. That was a little relic of me delivering the webinar last time. I really encourage you to check out Joanne's work. Google Joanne Coates. She's such a fantastic young photographer in her own right. Her work is stunning, but also her ability to understand the barriers in the landscape that she's working in, and also such wonderful participatory initiatives. I think it's really great and hyper-aware practice. So going back to the kind of reason we're here and talking about photography in a wider sense, what images are chosen and either on their own in photography context or as part of communications or reports or newspaper articles, it sends massive signals to the audience reading those images as to who or what the communicator, the newspaper, or in the nature sector, potentially the conservation organization values. Throughout our review and our report, we really listened to an expression, both in literature and in our interviews, that there's a real sense that the outdoors is for white people and for certain activities, and that comes through in the majority of photography, and that sadly should signals to many audiences that they should look elsewhere for activities and experiences if they don't fit those traditional stereotypes of an outdoor person. And this challenge is just aggravated by the low number of diverse or representative images of people or English nature kind of stubbornly in circulation. When we wrote the report, there was a number of team members with different specialisms. It was based on a literature review, which there's a lot of good research that's been done, especially in North America, looking at issues around ethnic minorities accessing nature. They're kind of slightly ahead of the curve on the volume of research, but one of the things we also did was over 25 hours of interviews with a kind of curated set of individuals, diverse groups, diverse people, outdoor influencers from the UK and beyond, from a variety of background. And we used, if you download the report, you'll see there's I think dozens, almost 100 unedited quotes from these interactions. We use liberally in our report to illustrate the points using authentic voices, and I'm going to tap into some of those as we speak as well. Jack, if you could cue my slide feed again, please. The report itself is quite weighty, and it includes appendices because it was peer reviewed and it stands as a piece of evidence that I hope is useful and informs other people's practice. But the core of it, kind of, which is true to our Climate Visuals project's wider style, is boiling this down to 6 engaging and simple principles that kind of, we hope, guide and inform photographers, commissioners, or just people thinking about narrative-based or communication-based work in the nature sector. These are principles, they're guidelines, they're not hard and fast rules. They can be hit in singular, they can be used as guidance, and there's probably no single image or project which could maybe achieve all of these in one go. I'm going to pass us through these 6 for the next 10-15 minutes with some of the insights that led us to them. And I'm going to use a selection of photography from our own curation, some amazing influencers and Instagrammers that we know. But sadly, there's a lot of images missing. I think one of the things that's really complex about photography is licensing and copyright. And I'm actually unable to show you some of the fantastic work that Natural England have commissioned, because I'm not from Natural England. This isn't a Natural England presentation. So our report goes into some of those complexities, but I think, you know, it's one of the challenges of photography is ownership, and making sure that we have the right ownership. And that's something I'm always very keen to respect. So the first principle is to use images to tell positive, identifiable stories, either as a photographer or as a communicator. And one of the reasons why is we have to shift society's mono-ethnic view. That's a quote that I gained from Maya Rose Craig, aka Bird Girl. And to make that shift, we require new stories, new role models, authentic, inclusive visual representations of England, diversity and landscape activities, and importantly, combinations of those things in the same pictures. We need images that transcend stock portraiture or the samey idyllic outdoor photography that the media or often adverts are saturated with. Visuals can capture attention, promote interest, and motivate engagement. And to do that, we should show diverse, identifiable individuals engaged in fulfilling positive experience in natural spaces. To quote one of our participants, in the world of instant everything, people don't always know what to think about stuff straight away. And that's where an image can be really important to capture that authenticity. It's also good to highlight learnings and amazing fun examples of on-the-ground efforts of diverse photographers or influencers from around the world. And that's because visual imagery is so good for capturing awareness, spurring interest, stopping people scrolling, and fostering real engagement. This is an awesome picture from the feed of the Mervinator, Myrna Valerio, based in the US, an educator, cross-country coast, ultra runner, obstacle course enthusiast, and I think it's one of our favorite Instagram feeds of everyone involved in the project. And another reason why, maybe in a more serious thing, why these images are important and getting this right is Public Health England, are the government body here in the UK, in 2020 found compelling evidence that natural spaces really matter for our health as individuals, especially poignant during COVID. Green environments associated with reduced levels of depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, and obesity, and are known to enhance the quality of life for children and adults. But, that's a big but, for us to be truly successful as communicators and help avert such critical issues and be part of that, outdoor culture and communications must be equitable, diverse, and be inclusive of people from all walks of life. Thinking back to some of our literature review, one of the key issues we highlighted was that one of the barriers to people engaging in outdoor spaces was a culture of exclusion that can leave many groups out of the traditional narrative. And in saying that, all the images I'm showing you today are positive images. So if sometimes I'm talking here in this talk about barriers and issues against positive images, these are all great images. I'm not highlighting the bad ones. And if, like this shot from Tasha Thompson, increasing the representation of diverse individuals in the outdoors, telling more inclusive stories can really help change a cultural narrative. Not in one foul swoop. We're not talking about emblematic or iconic photojournalism here. We're just talking about increasing the interest among diverse audiences in different ways. And to another quote from our research, representation matters. It is important to see people you identify with, and that is what inspires people. So the second principle is to create authentic representation and not tokenization. As a thread through all of the work our organization does in climate or in different parts of the world or in different photography sectors, we've always found that authenticity is such a critical foundation in photography. And in this context, it helps people tell an empowering, inclusive story that audiences will connect with. But there's also, we recognize that authenticity does take investment in procuring images and also building real relationships. And that can be a challenge for communicators on a budget and under time pressure. So there's different ways of sourcing images. People can produce live social media content, me included, here I am today. People can commission professional or emerging photographers, but obviously that does require kind of financial means. There's also ways of creating a photographic brief, an opportunity for contributions from volunteers. But there are already, incredibly successful and inspiring images and groups on social media. This is a UK birdwatching group called Flock Together, and I think they're a great example of how building connections with good content generators can often produce meaningful and mutual opportunities that sometimes spreads into branding or community work or conservation work. But I think my note of caution there, linked to tokenization, is that these interactions and the usage of those images has to be authentic and really should not be extractive purely for using a veneer of content. Tokenization or greenwashing is just something that people do see through and can be really harmful. So we also think that stock imagery and stage portraits can work. This image here is actually from Getty Images. I'm not even sure if it's shot in the UK, but I actually think it's an example of a really successful, albeit a little bit of a cheesy image. Good images are empowering, but bad stock images are unempowering and look performative, and that can be really negative as well. Just another shot here. This again is a stock image, but I think it has a sense of authenticity and potentially is an authentic moment that has been put into a commercial stock library. So I'm not completely against the concept of stock photography. It just has to be chosen well and used sparingly. Our third principle from the report is to make sure that we depict diverse activities in diverse landscapes. So not only diversifying the people, the participation and who's doing the photography, but actually also changing our definitions of what is an activity and what is a landscape away from some of the things we see far too much of. And that's because the cultural narrative of outdoor engagement and what it means to enjoy the outdoors is visually dominated by a subset of landscapes, activities, and people. So enhancing and expanding that representation really helps push through some of those stereotypes, many of which are quite harmful. And the best way to do that is to embrace different, work harder to find new visual narratives of spaces, people, and activities. This is a picture by Cheryl Durden. She's a arborologist, a tree surgeon, I think, in plainer English. And she runs a really wonderful self-effacing blog called In the Company of Giants. She's really a good example of how she's inspiring more diversity and also diversity of thought in co-producing and co-creating visuals with her colleagues on the ground, and focusing on the story of what she's doing, but also her own story, which I value. It means that I think also, I don't want to suggest here that photography is the be all and end all. You know, we also need to think about representation in positions of power and visibility. So not just the people on the ground in conservation, as it's difficult to shift the perception without those larger systemic changes. I think that means that potentially where we can do better is communicate and put a spotlight on those who are in positions of leadership from diverse backgrounds. And that might be something that helps systemic change and make sure that improving visuals isn't just glossing over some of the underlying issues, especially in larger organizations. Principle number 4 is to connect people to the wonderful diversity of natural places, from urban parks to national landscapes. So I think we're all used to seeing idyllic countryside and wildlife. It tends to dominate the visual story. I feel like I'd much rather call this principle less sheep and less sunsets, as there are a lot of images like that in circulation. And we need to, change that. It's not just the far away, the special and designated landscapes that are important for people. Gardening, walking an urban avenue, day tripping to a city park, informal green space, post-industrial brownfield space, walking the dog. That is the reality of a really successful, enjoyable moment in nature for a lot of us on a day-to-day basis. And we need to start showing more of that in photography as well. Connecting much more to everyday lives and the subtle and social ways in which they do connect with nature. So we need to also think about, make sure we don't only focus on the cultural narratives and visual framing around inclusion, but make sure there's kind of wider structural change and some of the stories come through behind that as well. So the principle 5, which is to include more real people in images, and we know that this helps people feel more connected, as people's outdoor and landscape preferences are as diverse and as unique as the people themselves that are within those pictures. So this wonderful portrait here is actually a stock photo from Getty Images, but I think it's a really high quality frame that hits the mark. There's a great sense of gaze, and I also know from the byline that it is also shot by a female Muslim photographer. And I think one of the things that we have to think about in photography is also a slight of sensitivity, is there are very real concerns, and our research and interviews pulled this out, about people having a sense of harassment, discrimination, violence, or simply how they sometimes appear or feel out of place in a location. And this is a repeated theme that came out during our research and also came to a head in the national media over Christmas with the incredible Muslim hikers group, which I really encourage you to check out on social media. I don't want to pretend that imagery alone can't enforce or change these major systemic changes, but it can make the outdoors feel more welcoming. The Muslim hikers group were trolled quite badly after organizing one of their walks over the winter period. And I think one of the things that was heartening to me was seeing the incredible positive social media support that came out after that incident, and also gave what was at that point a kind of relatively informal, potentially not nationally known group, now a kind of national media stage that I can see from afar. They've done a really good job of converting into engagement. Another quote from our participatory phase: we think imagery is probably more important than the written word. it's about just being one of the many diverse faces out there and showcasing it so others can actually see that there's a space for me. That person looks like me. That person comes from where I come from. And that person has some shared experiences as I have. And photography can help us with that. Finally, and the final principle, and I hope then we'll still have at least 10 minutes for your questions. So do start to kind of formulate them now, please. Principle 6, diversify who is behind the camera and the message. Improving the who, what, and where of outdoor imagery is only one part of the solution. We need to diversify who is behind the camera and designing the wider communications to help ensure greater empowerment and authentic visual choices. It's a sad reality that photography globally is dominated by white male photographers, and with that comes inherent issues of representation at the very least. In our review, after our report, we put this our draft out to a number of new participants to review and get their feedback, people that we found good insights from in the first phase. And this principle specifically came out as the most important. And in fact, if we can get this principle right, then many of the others will just follow naturally without us needing to think about it. So some examples here. There is a diverse group of individuals already hard at work, harnessing the power of social media to shift the outdoor narrative by documenting their own stories and experiences. And I think Instagram and Facebook particularly are a great place to see some amazing examples on how we can work with and learn from these individuals to create new visuals. This is a picture of Oliver at work. Oliver Hellawell is an amazing nature photographer who just so happens to have Down syndrome. And I think it's also really important to think about diversity in a sense of those parts of intersectionality that we can't necessarily see in the imagery as well. This, I have to recognize, was a gap in our research and I wish we'd ensure that we covered a larger intersectionality of diversity, including non-visible such as class or neurodiversity. I think we potentially we over-prioritized the things we could see in images. Something else that we potentially can't see from our vantage point here is how a lack of staff diversity means that many organizations, many communicators may not be aware of, let alone capable of knowing how to address foundational issues in communities when it comes to outreach. So this is, I thought I'd end with one of Joanne's quotes as pictures here. And I think we need to think about the future of where we can take this report as an organization and what we can do with the best route to impact or next steps that fits our expertise. And one of the things I feel that we should do is to start testing images, something we've done in other lines of work, or how potentially can nature-based organizations or community groups catalyze some form of photography library as a way of sourcing and sharing content, but thinking about democratically who owns, funds, and controls that. So Jack, if you can stop sharing my slides, that's the end of the presentation. We started a bit late. I'm certainly happy to stay until the hour. And if someone has a roving mic, I'm very happy to take questions from the audience, or if there's any that's come in from the online feeds as well. If someone could read those for me, I would be very grateful.
Thank you so much, Toby. I'm going to sort of do an awkward half look at the screen, half look at you guys. But yeah, just a reminder for everyone. Yeah, we're going to the Q&A now. So if you're coming in online, please pop them in the YouTube chat. And if you're here, please do pop your hand in the air if you've got a question. If you don't, I'll kick things off, Toby. So I really responded to what you were saying about it not just being an issue of the images, but the sectors themselves. And I wonder if you worry that kind of giving people the tools to talk in a diverse visual language might slow down or increase tokenization where they're not making those changes internally as well, in like the nature sector and the conservation sector where diversity is such an issue.
Yeah, and if you want to look at me, I'm actually facing you virtually from the back of the room, so you can hello, I'm actually my mechanical eyes somewhere at the back there. I think, yeah, that's one of, I am worried about that. And I think one of the things that potentially gives me slight comfort, but in an awkward way, is that if organizations or communication groups attempt to go out there and fix the images, they will in a kind of unconsidered or bottom dollar or like quick fix way, unless they're very, very ignorant and dangerously so, they will quickly come across challenges and questions that they will be unable to answer themselves. And it starts to force the point from a resourcing and a communication point of needing to diversify who is involved in at least the design of the communications, and then one step further, who is thinking about the interaction or the audience it's going to. So visuals could be used as a veneer, and I am concerned about that, and I think that's a major issue. But just by people embarking on that need to improve their communications starts to unravel and highlight some of the structural issues they have, and I would hope lead to solutions. That's an optimistic way of looking at how a problem might turn into solutions. To counter my own point, I do worry that people and organizations are, I would hope, at the point where they have an awareness and a desire to change and improve and diversify their communications. But when they then feel unable to do it, or anxious, or don't know where to start, it means they just don't change anything, and it's business as usual, and they keep showing us pictures of birds on branches and icicles, which don't engage people. So yeah, I feel it's more that fork. Although in saying that, and I won't highlight some, I have seen some disastrous tokenization in an inexcusable way by some organizations that should know and perform better in how they present themselves.
Sweet, thank you. Oh, have we got a question online?
Yeah, so it's less of a question, but more of a comment. So Tony says, this has all been so interesting, thank you. Not a question as such, but your talk has me thinking of how marginalised groups engage with nature outside of these settings. And then he also says, I'm reminded of a strong tradition of allotmenting in Punjabi community elders. My granddad and his mates loved growing veggies. I wonder if other groups have carved out their own spaces in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I'd respond to that, and maybe I didn't stress it enough in my talk, that one of the things that we started to do, but was outside the scope of our research, was force the changing of the definition of the word nature. And in fact, I wish, it's a kind of restriction of the English language. I'm sure in other cultures, how we might describe nature is specific to what we would consider to be nature if we thought about it in better terms. Your example of allotments, I showed an image of an Asian family in their allotment. That is nature. A tiny backyard with a bit of grass, or not even a bit of grass, what's the properties of that piece of geography that is nature? It could be a balcony on a roof terrace. It could be, as I mentioned, pieces of landscape that might not have the aesthetics of nature. It might not be green space. It might be blue space or brownfield space. I mean, I personally grew up in the Midlands in the 80s and 90s, and some of my most memorable encounters with nature were within what has been popularized as kind of urban exploring in kind of post-industrial sites that were being reclaimed by nature. They are nature if that's how people define them. And I think that's an important part of this work, is that we need to take as many pictures in the informal or reality of what nature is to a larger group of people, and not just show national parks or places with postcard-like beauty. And in some instances, photography is not a great medium for that, because nature can be birdsong or just fresh air, and none of those things are visible as well. So I would encourage people that if it's a sense of nature to them, then to embrace it and try and weave that into communications as well, not just the grass and the trees, to use the kind of British stereotype.
I love that so much. I really love that on Festival of Nature, we're going to be challenging exactly what we think of nature as and totally imploding it. Love that. Does anyone in the audience have any more questions? Yes. Oh, Shade, we'll just pass the mic. Try and speak really close.
Who was first?
Oh, over.
Oh yeah, try and hold it as close to your face.
It's okay, I used to work for local radio. Hi, Tony. In these terms, you're creating a bank of images, and we've seen examples. I've dropped one in, I don't know if you've seen the chat in YouTube, but examples we have of better representations of AI in, that aren't just the sort of whizzy pictures. And then there's the gender spectrum set that Vice produced, which used a trans photographer to put together. But the question in my mind is, you create the images, but what about the process then of getting a broader set of organizations to actually engage with those images and use them in an appropriate fashion and not repeat the kind of problems by extracting them and then putting a caption underneath them that completely misses the point or actually distorts the whole point, in the way that you talked about the Muslim Walks group being seen both as a positive by their supporters, but also something to be trolled and attacked.
I'm in my own little Zoom world speaking to you from Stroud, so I can't see the chat images you're referring to. And as a point of clarity, we did these images I provided as examples. We're not creating the library, we're kind of doing the guidelines for it. But in my other work at Climate Visuals, I do focus much more on providing a library of images that's accessible and free. So you're talking into something I'm also very interested in other parts of my work around distribution or content gaps or overuse of certain content. And I think we need to, firstly recognize some of the systemic or architectural reasons why certain images dominate visual media. Often popular images are popular because they're popular and they have this kind of ever climbing spiral. In my work on climate imagery, the polar bear is the kind of prime offender, for want of a better word, of that, in that people use polar bears to talk about climate because people use polar bears to signify climate. It's become embedded, and by in part it's also lost, the polar bear has lost its teeth. It's no longer effective because we've overused it to talk about climate. Polar bears don't really resonate with the British public as much as maybe heat waves or beasts from the east might, for example. The second point I think you mentioned was about people appropriating them, or a sense of control, or making sure the context is right. I think there's certain images which perform really well as visual metaphors for certain topics and don't need a caption. Everything's in the image, and I'm a big fan of those images, the kind of cover or all in the frame. Some images need a caption to perform well or to be accurate or have a sense of truth, and obviously then that can be manipulated by the press. We personally on our library put out our images with a mandatory caption and quite a long reading into what's going on into the image, and by and large it's a sense of trust. We have to hope that the media organizations publishing it and engaging with it and printing it respect that. And I want this talk to focus on my kind of recent work at Climate Visuals, but prior to joining Climate Visuals, I spent 15 years as an environmental photographer producing environmental stories. And I had to rely on a sense of trust that they were going to do positive, do good around environmental stories. And by the more popular and more wide-reaching those images were, equated to how them being more effective as content, but also increased the risk of them being misappropriated. And I feel that in that sense, it could be a bit of a numbers game, that the more popular an image is, if it's doing well and performing well in how it's changing people's beliefs or just inspiring them to think about something, so long as it's doing potentially more positive and outweighing the risks of that image being used by other groups, I think there's net good. there's no concrete answers in there for you, I'm afraid. But yeah, we do certainly need to recognize things we can do around distribution and context. And I would love, this is a whole nother lecture I'd love to give at some point. I would love the big entities like Facebook and Google to pay more attention to the algorithms behind distributing content, because I think a sense of responsibility there could help images stay true to their original context as well.
Thanks, Toby. Was there one more question? We'll do one more, then we'll wrap up because we started late.
Hi, thank you, because this is really needed, this conversation. I'm a social practice artist, and I'm interested in how, I'm getting more interested in how technology can be used to, in fact, shall I turn around? Are you that way? Hello. Yeah, how technology can be used to encourage people to get into their green spaces. So that could be local parks, local spaces in cities, as well as being out in the countryside, and sort of use, and we're sort of in the pervasive media studio now, and I'm kind of thinking, you know, so for me it's becoming more and more interesting. How do we encourage people into those spaces using digital formats, you know, and really experiment with that. So if there's, I mean, we're talking about photography, but obviously there's other things that we can be using alongside that. So you could have like 360-degree photography. I've forgotten what that's called, actually, or augmented reality or virtual reality spaces. Have you looked at any of those things in your report, or have you worked with social practice artists as well to gather?
I would say it's on the edge of the things I'm reading rather than a kind of core part of it. I try and focus on lens-based medium, but I'm going to kind of use that as a launchpad of possibility, I think, in many ways. Photography, lens-based medium, is really rubbish at time travel. It's primarily a documentary medium. The fastest that you can use lens-based media to inform or communicate is in situations like this, where I am coming to you live via this mechanical eye in Stroud. The minute this is recorded, it's documentary and it's archived. One of the things that we know from climate communication that we can then assume about conservation and nature-based communication is that people are extremely curious, both optimistic but often anxious and concerned about what the future might look like. In climate communications, we often think about net zero being a good place and a warming world being a bad place. And it's difficult for us to conjure up tangible or accurate or inspiring images of that for people, because we don't have the images and we can't use lens-based media to acquire those images. And to me, that's where I think, rather than be disgruntled at photography, I want to kick the door open and challenge the kind of technologies you're talking about, whether it's augmented, whether it's AI, whether it's layering, whether it's this wonderful app I tested yesterday where I put my postcode in and it shows me what my house looks like if it's flooded or involved in a wildfire. There's an incredible array of technology, and also traditional medium. Let's not please forget poetry or traditional 2 and 3D based artworks as well, that can create a really strong emotional response about a positive and negative future and how we potentially could be involved in which direction that goes. And in that sense, over to the technologists and the traditionalists, because lens-based media is not the best at that. So yeah, to me, that's where I'm most excited and most intersects with my work is you know, where does the lens stop and who else is doing great work to make us think about a dystopian or a utopian future.
I think on that hand, back over to the technologists in the room, we'll leave it. So thank you so much, Toby. And thank you all for joining us on the first day of the Festival of Nature. There are loads of other brilliant events happening, so please do check it out. It's all happening in the city, but also online. You can check it out on Twitter at Fest of Nature. And also, everybody here is invited to our second event with Festival of Nature happening next Tuesday, the 14th. We're having a Futurist Collective Social, so Anyone interested in nature, community, climate, activism, creativity, come through. There's going to be work from our residents and drinks, and just come and have a chat. So please do join us then. And lastly, next week's talk, Director Sasha Wares will be joining us, sharing some thoughts in progress about crafting emotional engagement in virtual and mixed reality, with reference to 2 recent pieces, VR drama Adult Children and the Mixed Reality exhibition at the Museum of Austerity. And it will be chaired by Mandy Rose, the professor in documentary and digital cultures at UWE. If you want to stick around Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, then please come and find one of the studio team. Put your hands in the air, studio team. Hey. And we'll be happy to help. And if you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thanks so much for being here today. And have a lovely sunny Friday, although it's not so sunny anymore.